Hello and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today we talk about making APIs easy to find and use. And it's going to be a continuation of our conversation we had around API products. And once again, welcome Mike to this discussion. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you. Good to be back with you again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this discussion, and it's going to be part of our what the web do series, where we talk about how things that happen in the API space maybe have interesting parallels in the web world. And to me, it's always at least something interesting to think about. Maybe it's not always something you can translate one to one, but it is an interesting thought. The last time we talked about building API products, so to speak. So starting from consumers, thinking about their needs, building API products, really thinking of them as things that others can use. And then we ended, I think, with this idea of, okay, now I have built a product, now what? And Mike, now what?
Now what? Well, now somebody has to find it, right? You've got to place it somewhere, depending on whether or not, how you're creating this, whether this is just for your own organization or for a select set of, we would say, partners, or if it's going to be for the open public. You have to come up with a way for people to find it. So there are different ways of doing that. And then you have to make it easy for them to sort of understand and consume. We talked a little bit about that last time, making it sort of easy. But the finding, I think, is a thing that's, or we sometimes say discovery, is something that's pretty challenging right now, I think.
It still is. And I think it's going to be something that is even more challenging, so to speak, because we will see more growth of the API space in general. People will have to or will be able to work with more and more APIs, but then also finding a way through all these APIs, I think, will be just a challenge and something that we have to make a little bit better, maybe. So if we look back just a couple of years, let's say, I think the traditional answer always was portals. Let's have portals. So
That's right.
what's wrong with them, or why aren't portals sufficient, or how do portals fit into the story of making APIs easier to find and use?
Right. So I think one of the first things to think about when we talk about portals, usually we're talking about some kind of web content, some kind of human focused content. Often portals are for humans to find and use things, which is just fine. But now you're kind of trying to recreate search or some kind of hierarchical listing registration on the web for APIs, and that's actually a pretty big job. I think another real big challenge is that you've got different audiences. So whether or not you're doing something for your own organization or whether you're doing something for the open web is really very different. The way that I would find your API if I was working in a company with you is very different than the way that I might find it if I was just on the web itself. So I think that's one of the key elements. I think we talk about there are three different types, right? We talk about private APIs, partner APIs, and public APIs. Is that right?
I think it makes sense to look at these as slightly different things that you want to do. There's certainly certain design ideas and things like that that I think make sense for all of them, so to speak. But then on the other hand, right, if you're looking at private APIs, your potential consumer set of consumers, let's put it like this, right? It's much smaller, it's well defined. Even if you think about partner APIs, I think it is a thing that you have established relationship with these partners, so you know how to communicate with them potentially. But then if you think about public APIs, I think this is where things get really interesting in terms of how can we get these things out there so that it's like Google, so to speak, right? How does search engine optimization look like for APIs in that public space, so to speak? And I'm wondering, what would you say? How does it look like, the whole SEO thing, right? Which is such a huge thing on the web. What is SEO in the API space?
Yeah, I think SEO in the API space is a challenge until you think of the job of this whole search engine as content. So I think what you do is every API that's a product on the web needs its own website. You need your own SEO tools. You need your own searchability and findability. I think you're on your own when you're creating a product like that for the public space. I think this idea of a portal works really well inside an enterprise, where we're all basically looking at the same material. It's kind of an enclosed system. It's a contained world. So the portals that I see offered by lots of organizations, I think work really well, in the private world. But in that public world, I think you're just kind of creating your own web page, your own landing page, and your own content space. And that's kind of hard to scale or organize in a big way. But that's kind of the way the web's always worked, right?
I think it is. But one thing that I find interesting is that you still see a lot of organizations pretty much building their own portals because they feel like maybe the portals that they get as part of like traditional API management platforms may not quite fit their needs. They might not be flexible enough. They might not provide enough features or branding. And then they just build their own portals. But that also, I think, just seems to be, it's not a trivial exercise to go through.
Yeah.
And I think that's a space where we also think more and more, we will see more and more offerings coming up, I think, for making it easier for organizations to build their portals or to build what people now, I think, more and more call also marketplaces, which is, I think, more the externally facing perspective that people have.
Yeah, I think there's a whole kind of study in industry on findability, right? It's like how we make something easy to find or easy to use. And I think we're going to have to do a lot more in that space as we sort of expand out. One of the advantages that Google had when they started their businesses, they looked at the way things were connected to each other. If I find your web page, I often find different links on your page that connect you to other things, and I can sort of create this graph, and I can create a site rank or page rank, they called it. I could do all these other things once I found your content. That's not really the same for APIs. We don't quite do that yet. I don't know. If I find your API, I don't really know what other APIs you're using right now. We don't really have a lot of standardized technology for that. I think we have some options, but we don't see that yet. So I think we're still very early in the process of just creating registries or lists, maybe, but we're not quite at the point of actually creating, good findability or searchability for APIs. And I think we do need to expect that that's going to change over time.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. What you just said also, it's really interesting to think of, again, coming back to the what would the web do kind of theme.
That's right.
Thinking of it in terms of the web, right? Where like in the kind of mid or early 90s, we had Yahoo coming up and these companies that were pretty much just building directories, you could say, organizing things, right, in a very kind of just organized fashion. And then Google came along in the late 90s and completely changed everything by saying, you know what, there's a much better way of doing things when we look at how these things are interconnected and how we can build ranking with this and build recommendations out of this. And this changed the whole web thing fundamentally. And I'm wondering, so you said, right, we're not quite there yet. So is there something where you would say for this kind of really total shift of how the API space, the findability and the usability, how that space might work? What would it take for going from Yahoo to Google, so to speak?
Right, yeah, that's right. Going from lists to search, I like to call it. So one of the things that comes to mind, there are a few technologies, a few standardized patterns for sort of describing an API, whether it's Open API or Async API, or one that you and I have talked about before, Home Documents, which is a project on the IETF, on the an RFC space. So in code, we do this with package groups like NPM and CPAN and others, where when I use a package, when I publish a package, I publish all the other packages I use, a dependency graph, right? So you would know if you consumed my my code package, all the other dependencies that I have. So I could imagine maybe a document that describes my API and then lists all the other APIs that I call. like a home document. I think might be
Yeah.
a way to do that. So now, if I search and I find your description document, I might then find all the other APIs you use for payment or shipping or
Yeah.
sending SMS messages. So maybe that's a possible way to start thinking about the connections. But I haven't seen anybody doing this yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure that this would really happen at scale. I mean, it would happen for smaller projects where people would have, for whatever reason, they would be open
Yeah.
about sharing this information. I think you would also find a lot of people who would just say, well, that's none of your business. Here's my API. I implement it in whichever way I please, and I'm not
Well,
telling
and
you how.
exactly right. And then I also think there's a sort of a fundamental one of the successes of the web and APIs on the web is information hiding. It's like I don't have to share with you a lot of follow-on information for this to work properly. If I share that with you, it might actually sort of create a less reliable or less resilient API because now you're sort of expecting me to use a particular service where if I do information hiding, I can use any service I want. So it may actually be a bit antithetical to the way APIs on the web should work. I haven't really thought that through, but we're going to have to kind
Yeah.
of deal with something like that, I think.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hypothetically to just see, how this played out. If there was a facility like this, how many APIs would actually publish this information? My guess is not too many, but I don't know.
Well, when it boils down to it, though, right? APIs are only really valuable when they're consumed. They have to be found and used, whether it's a private portal or just partner relationships or an open web. So we've got to figure out how to make APIs easy to find, right? And then easy to use as well. So we'll have to figure something out, and maybe it's just a step-by-step process.
Yeah, there are other ways, and I think this is again something we probably should defer to our next episode. But there are other ways as well where you could say this dependency graph could also be created by somebody who just knows about the dependencies, right? Not by the API itself, so to speak,
It's
but by
true.
somebody who keeps track of this, right? So we had things such as Rapid API, who came
Yep.
along and said we gonna publish a whole lot of APIs, and then we know who's consuming those APIs, and that will allow us to make recommendations. I think these are maybe interesting ideas as well. On the other hand, it seems like this hasn't really taken off this much. So there may be some other interesting things to discuss in that space.
Yeah, I think we have to get ready. This is going to get bigger, and we're going to have to figure out how to scale. One of the things about Rapid API that I think is interesting is it's it's a portal kind of approach, right? I go there, I find out what they support, and then I can use it. But only if I'm using Rapid API. Is there a way to scale this larger? And I think that's going to be a challenge, and that could be a pretty exciting set of changes coming to us in the next decade or so.
Yeah, I think this is in. Let's definitely talk more about this next time when we can talk much more about marketplaces, because there's also this. What I find really interesting is that Rapid API made this shift from, they started with saying we'll just build the marketplace, and
Hmm.
now they have transitioned a lot into well, we'll actually do enterprise marketplaces, but they can still have like this interesting, I think, story where they say, well, in our enterprise marketplace, there's a lot of knowledge around how everybody's consuming APIs, because we have a lot of these enterprise marketplaces that are running, right? So I think there's these really interesting, maybe also hybrid models or federated models where these where this information could be used for
Mm,
interesting new ways how to find and use APIs. But I think this is
interesting.
really something where we can dig a little deeper maybe the next time.
Yeah, I like that idea. A kind of portal of portals, a marketplace of
It's just
marketplaces.
it's kind of just a marketplace that is informed by the wisdom of the marketplace crowd, so to speak, right? So if you run, it's
Ah,
like the supermarkets, right? If you run a supermarket, you can do a much better job of product placement in the supermarket if you run 1,000 supermarkets and you know what people like and what they dislike, right? So you have all these patterns of product popularity that you can use. And I think similar things might be possible. I don't know, but We'll talk
That's
more
good.
about this the next time, I would say.
All right, I like that idea.
Okay, and in that case, let's wrap it up for today. So we were just discussing a little bit like now you have these products. Now, how can you make it easy for others to find and consume them? I think there are some interesting parallels to the web. There also are some interesting differences to how things evolved on the web. And I think there also is quite a bit of potential of things that can still happen. And I think that's a nice takeaway. Mike, as usual, thanks so much for joining. I think that was a very interesting discussion.
Yep.
And the next time we'll just dig a little deeper into how the whole marketplace world may be evolving in the next couple of years.
I love it. All right, see you next time.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next time. Bye.